In 1857, a prosecutor stood up in a French court and argued that a specific arrangement of ink on paper was a loaded weapon. He wasn't trying to ban a manifesto or a guide to treason. He was trying to imprison an author for writing a story about a woman who was bored. And France, apparently, just couldn't handle it. This is the story of how Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary ended up on trial for corrupting public morality. Not the author alone, the actual book. As if a stack of paper could be arrested, interrogated, and thrown in prison for bad behavior. The charge? The book contained a woman who wanted things. And worse, it didn't punish her properly for it. Let's be honest, adultery wasn't exactly breaking news in French literature. Authors had been writing about affairs for decades. Balzac did it. Dumas did it. Half of Paris was doing it. But those writers had the decency to wrap up their scandalous stories with a nice moral lesson at the end. The sinful woman would repent, suffer beautifully, and die with everyone learning something valuable about virtue. Flaubert's crime was simpler and somehow more offensive. He just described a woman, without telling anyone how to feel about her. Absolutely unforgivable. Meet Emma Bovary, farmer's daughter, convent educated. Married to Charles Bovary, a country doctor whose most exciting quality is that he exists. Emma approaches marriage the way every romantic novel she's ever read told her to, as the beginning of her real life, the moment when everything gets interesting. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. She thought she would be happy, Flaubert writes with the emotional warmth of a medical examiner. But the happiness that should have resulted from this love had not come. In other words, she married the human equivalent of unseasoned chicken, and was shocked to discover it didn't taste like champagne. Emma had spent her teenage years devouring romance novels, the kind where women are swept away by mysterious strangers, to exotic locations where everyone has extremely important feelings all the time. She expected passion, adventure. At minimum, a husband who could hold a conversation about something other than bunions. Instead, she got Charles. Sweet, devoted, catastrophically boring Charles. A man who chews with his mouth open and whose idea of romance is, well, he doesn't have one. His greatest ambition is to maybe, possibly, someday perform a moderately successful surgery. He loves Emma completely and has absolutely no idea who she actually is. Emma Bovary was the first victim of the Instagram versus reality trap, 150 years before the internet existed. She'd built her entire identity around a fantasy life that didn't match reality, and now she was stuck scrolling through her own disappointing existence with no filter that could fix it. She'd been sold a dream, and the dream turned out to be a scam. Sound familiar? Emma realizes something terrible. Marriage isn't the climax of her story. It's not even the interesting middle part. It's just the beginning of a very long, very dull forever. The romantic novels lied to her. The convent education lied to her. Everyone she'd ever trusted had promised her that marriage would be the answer, and now she was stuck living inside the question. And here's where Flaubert committed his first literary crime. He made us understand why that's unbearable. He didn't mock Emma for wanting more. He didn't lecture her about gratitude. He just showed us exactly what her life felt like from the inside, and trusted readers to draw their own conclusions. Now, here's something fascinating about Flaubert's relationship with his scandalous heroine. When asked about Emma, he supposedly said, "Madame Bovary, c'est moi." Madame Bovary is me. Not, I based her on someone I knew. Not, she represents a type of woman I've observed. She is me. A middle-aged male author identifying completely with a desperate provincial housewife. Which tells you everything about why he couldn't condemn her. How do you condemn yourself? Flaubert saw his own yearning for something more in Emma's restlessness. His own artistic frustration in her boredom. His own hatred of provincial mediocrity in her desperate attempts to escape. The only difference was that Flaubert had an outlet for his intensity, writing, and Emma had none. She couldn't channel her passions into art or work or anything society would accept. Her only escape routes were fantasy, debt, affairs, and eventually, poison. He gave her his soul and trapped it in a woman's body in 19th century France. Then he watched what happened. What happened was a trial that would change everything, for Flaubert, for literature, and for what books were allowed to say. But before we get there, you need to understand something. Flaubert's defense lawyer came up with a strategy so brilliant and so technically dishonest, and that it not only saved Flaubert from prison, but accidentally changed literature forever. To pull it off, he had to lie about what the book actually meant. Enter prosecutor Ernest Pinard. Imagine the original Twitter cancellation mob, but with a law degree and a terrifying mustache. A man who took his job of protecting France from dangerous ideas with the seriousness of someone defusing a bomb. Pinard had read the book multiple times, marking passages, building his case. He stood before the judges with genuine conviction that this novel would corrupt the nation. His opening argument was essentially, "Gentlemen, this book is disgusting. Not because of what it says, but because of what it doesn't say." Which is a wild way to start a prosecution, but okay. Pinard's problem wasn't the sex scenes, they're barely there. His problem was that Flaubert wrote a 300-page novel about an adulteress without once stopping to tell readers that adultery is bad. There's no moral voice, no narrator shaking his head sadly. No moment where Emma begs God for forgiveness. Just a woman making choices and experiencing consequences, with the author nowhere to be found. The book has no moral framework, Pinard declared, as if this were self-evidently criminal. He zeroed in on the smoking gun. It wasn't the sex, it was the attitude. He read the passage where Emma looks in the mirror after her first affair, crying out in joy, "I have a lover." To Pinard, this was the crime. Not that she did it, but that she liked it. He argued that Flaubert committed the ultimate sin. He wrote a sin that felt good. There's no instant lightning bolt from God, no immediate shame spiral, just relief. And to a 19th century prosecutor charged with protecting public morals, the idea that a woman could cheat and feel happy about it wasn't just fiction. It was a threat to national security. If women started believing they deserved pleasure, deserved escape, deserved more than what they were given, where would it end? Pinard's argument boiled down to one terrified realization. Empathy is dangerous. Making sin understandable is worse than making it explicit. A book that helps you understand why someone would break the rules is far more threatening to social order than one that just condemns them for it. That's what actually terrified him. Now remember that brilliant, dishonest defense strategy? Here it comes. Flaubert's defense attorney Jules Senard was older, more experienced, and then understood something crucial about courts. Judges don't want to be revolutionaries. They want an excuse to do the reasonable thing. Senard's job was to give them that excuse. His strategy was to pretend the book was exactly what the prosecution said it wasn't, deeply, profoundly moral. "Gentlemen," Senard began, "have you seen how this woman ends?" He described Emma's death in horrifying detail. The slow destruction by arsenic, the convulsions, the black liquid pouring from her mouth, the suffering that goes on and on, while Charles watches helplessly and her daughter cries in confusion, not understanding why her mother won't wake up. Is this not punishment enough? Is this not a cautionary tale about the wages of sin? Here's where the lie gets elegant. Senard argued that Flaubert's real purpose was to warn society about women corrupted by romantic novels and bad education. Emma Bovary wasn't a sympathetic portrait. She was a cautionary tale about what happens when you let young women read garbage that fills their heads with unrealistic expectations. Parents, take note. This is what happens when you don't monitor your daughter's reading habits. It was genius, and it was complete nonsense. Flaubert never intended the book as moral instruction. He wrote to a friend, "I want to portray a particular type of woman, and I wish to be impartial." Impartial. That's the word that would have gotten him convicted. You can't be impartial about sin in 19th century France. You have to pick a side, you have to condemn. And the idea that an author could simply observe human behavior without judging it was almost incomprehensible and deeply threatening. If artists stopped telling people what to think, who would control the narrative? If readers started forming their own opinions about morality, where would it end? But Senard kept hammering. Look at the collateral damage. Charles finds the love letters and dies of a broken heart. The daughter ends up orphaned and working in a factory. This book doesn't just punish Emma, it destroys everyone around her. Pinard fired back. The suffering comes from practical circumstances, not moral reckoning. She never acknowledges her sins. Even on her deathbed, she barely participates in the last rites. Where is the repentance? Where is the moment when she begs God for forgiveness? He was hitting on something important. Emma's death is horrifying, but it's not redemptive. She doesn't make peace with God. She doesn't have a moment of clarity where she realizes she was wrong. She just dies, painfully, having failed to escape the trap of her life. That's what makes it so disturbing. There's no narrative satisfaction, no moral resolution, no lesson learned. Just death, meaningless and painful. But Sénart had given the judges exactly what they needed, a way to acquit Flaubert while maintaining that society's morals were intact. Look, the adulteress dies horribly. Clearly this teaches proper values. The verdict came not guilty, but barely. And the ruling was a masterpiece of legal hedging. The work does not appear to have been written with the sole purpose of gratifying essential passions. But then they added a warning. The work had exceeded the boundaries that even the most liberal literature should not cross. Translation: you got away with it this time, don't try it again. Flaubert was furious about the reprimand. He'd been acquitted, but also publicly scolded. His artistic vision had been judged and found wanting by men who didn't understand what he was trying to do. But what happened next made the whole ordeal worth it. Here's the beautiful irony. The trial made Flaubert famous. Madame Bovary became an instant bestseller. Everyone wanted to read the scandalous book that had gone to court. And people bought it expecting pornography and got a devastatingly accurate portrait of provincial boredom instead. They came for the scandal and stayed for the sentences. Flaubert had spent 5 years perfecting every single one. Pinard had accidentally created the book's success. By declaring it dangerous, he made it essential reading. Everything he tried to prevent, the book's influence, its reach, its impact, he had guaranteed. The Streisand Effect, 19th century edition. The trial proved something the prosecution never intended. The most dangerous books aren't the ones with explicit content. They're the ones that make you understand. That create empathy where society demands judgment. That show you the human being behind the sin instead of the sin itself. Pinard understood this instinctively. That's why he fought so hard. Because a book that makes you sympathize with a dissatisfied woman is far more threatening to social order than a book that just describes her naked. Sympathy is contagious. Understanding spreads. The real crime wasn't Emma's affairs. It was Flaubert's suggestion that marriage could be a prison, that romantic love could fade into dull companionship, that wanting more might be rational rather than sinful. He'd written a book suggesting the entire social structure built on women's contentment was based on a lie. You can't put that back in the bottle. Today, Madame Bovary is studied in universities worldwide. The book that was too dangerous for 19th century France is now required reading for teenagers. Literary scholars now consider it the first truly modern novel, the book that proved fiction didn't need to moralize to matter. Ernest Pinard is remembered only because he failed. His name survives solely as a footnote to the book's success. Every student who reads Madame Bovary learns about him as the man who tried to destroy a masterpiece and accidentally made it immortal. His prosecution became the book's best marketing. History has a sense of humor. Madame Bovary, c'est moi, Flaubert said. She was him, his yearning, his frustration, his hatred of mediocrity, all trapped in a woman's body with no way out. He understood her completely, and because he understood her, he couldn't condemn her. That's his real defense of Emma. Not what his lawyer said in court, but what he put on the page, a complete human being. Flawed, desperate, tragic, and real. That's why they put a book on trial in 1857. And that's why, more than 150 years later, Madame Bovary still makes people nervous. Because Flaubert was right, she is us. All of us who've ever wanted more than we were given. All of us who've ever felt trapped by lives that looked perfect from the outside. All of us who've ever wondered if wanting something different made us broken. The trial proved that books can be dangerous, not because they're obscene, but because they tell truths no one wants to acknowledge. And sometimes, that's the most radical thing a book can do.